Whenever we start a project, the first thing that we need to do is find the important sculptural landmarks. These telltale signs of an object's mass are really going to help our audience understand instantly what it is that they're looking at and how to consume some of the details. We want to try to provide our audience with as many little cues, if you will, as many little nuggets of information as we can, so that they can understand what it is that they're looking at. And the first thing that I always like to do whenever I start any project is, of course, look at some reference images. For quadrupeds, for animals, there's some important anatomical landmarks that we need to be mindful of as we start the sculpting process, because in every sense, we're going to need to incorporate these landmarks to both make it feel real, make it feel believable, and to help our audience out. So I'm going to be working on a grizzly bear. You're more than welcome to choose whatever quadruped animal that you'd like. But for me, my little grizzly bear here has some really important anatomical features that I need to ensure I replicate in my sculpture itself. Now, as I look around at some of these reference images, there's a couple things in here that stand out almost immediately. First and foremost, I'm looking at the overall shape itself. Now, if you look way back over here on the back side of the bear, it carries a tremendous amount of weight in the rear of the bear itself. So we can already see that the rear of the bear is going to be a big prominent landmark that we need to make. In addition, as we continue to examine the details of the bear's shape itself, we can't forget about this gigantic hump on the back here. You see it in almost every single photograph. These two, they're being cut off by the frames, but it's there. Well, what is that hump? Why is there a hump on the back of a bear? This is not like a camel. It shouldn't have a hump. Well, in all honesty, I did some research on it, and that hump is really the shoulder blades of the bear itself. So there's two big shoulder blades right here on the bear. And these shoulder blades, of course, are at an angle, and they're pushing right here on the base or the spine of our bear itself. That's a prominent landmark that I want to make sure that's included in my sculpture. It's something that our audience is going to expect to see. It's kind of an iconic detail of a bear itself, so we want to make sure that that's included in the final sculpture as well. Now, whenever I'm working with reference images, I always like to try to figure out how the bear bends and how it works, the physical mechanics of the skeleton system. And that is really quite helpful in the early sculpting process, because we can start laying down some of that anatomy. Now, I apologize, we don't need to see the top of this bear down over here. What I am most concerned with are the bones and the skeletal structure itself. When you're examining and looking for reference images, try to find some reference images of the animal in movement, in motion. That way you can understand which direction all of these joints are going to be operating and moving. Now, originally, I didn't think that the forearm here for our bear was going to be bending up this way, but it totally is, right? And that's an important detail that we want to make sure it captures. So we have a sphere back here for the elbow, and it is connected to the wrist down over here, and then this whole thing rotates this way, up, okay, up that way, which is pretty neat. And it totally makes sense. Once you start looking at the reference images, you're like, yeah, of course it makes sense. He's going to pick up some berries or whatever, and he's going to need to put it inside of his mouth. So it makes sense that this is the termination point for the rotation of that entire arm, which is pretty cool. But that's a good detail that we need to look at. And specifically, when it comes to the elbow and the knees, I want you to start looking for the landmarks as to where those elbows and the knees are in the actual anatomy of the animal itself. You can really easily see it on this bear over here. There's his elbow. Here's his knee right there. And I apologize, I'm kind of getting in the way of the knee and the elbow. So I apologize. Let's see, we'll look at this one. We can see it on this guy as well. Now, the elbow is on the back of his arm, right? It's not on the front, okay? It's not over here. It's on the back side of his arm. So this is going to be muscle, okay? And then that muscle is going to terminate down at the elbow joint itself. When you're trying to figure out how these muscles and bones and joints interact with each other, think of muscles like gigantic springs. They push and pull against all of the other objects inside of our arm to make the movement of that arm or that leg or whatever. But finding the exact location of rotation is incredibly helpful because now we know where it needs to be a little bit more bony in the sculpture itself. We're not going to put a lot of fat deposits and a lot of really soft tissue illusions back here because there's a gigantic hard bone back there that's making the arm and the elbow rotate. Same with the knee. The knee is in the front. It's right there on the grizzly bear, okay? You can see it, he's just below the rock, but it's right there on this top one as well. Figuring out the locations of the elbows and the knees are really going to help you start fleshing out some basic anatomy, right? For the arms itself, since we know that the elbow is on the back, here you can easily see the muscle group for our bear, which is pretty cool. Same with this picture down here. You can easily start to see that since the knee is this way, look, there's a muscle here that goes from his rear and it goes all the way down and terminates at that bone itself. These are important landmarks that as sculptors we need to start considering and thinking about as we advance on to that next stage. We're not just making basic simple shapes, we're trying to inform those simple shapes with some actual anatomy. Now the last thing that we're going to talk about is, of course, the most important part of any animal, and that's his face, the head. Now we like to make sure that our heads are as accurate as we can because we make relationships with people's eyes. We make relationships with their faces, whether it be humans or animals, whatever it is. We always look for their eyes and their head first. So there's some important details in this bear's head that I want to look at as I start this sculpting phase. Specifically, I'm looking at the overall shape of the head, and you can just barely see it in this one up here. But the head for a bear is generally spherical. Then, of course, it's got this gigantic rectangle coming out for a snout. So we have a big sphere that goes to a rectangle for the opening of it, for the snout, his nose, and his mouth. Of course, we can't forget the ears, which are nothing more than a whole series of flattened spheres into discs, kind of pushed into the central mass of the head itself. So we have sphere for a head, a rectangle for the nose and mouth, and then spheres, flattened spheres for the eyes. And we're starting to zero in on the really important shape information that defines the look of our little bear. And I think that's the important part that we need to consider as we look through this phase is what is the DNA, the sculptural DNA of this shape, and zeroing in on that and having an answer to that question will help us choose the correct simple shapes for that area. Now, if the basic simple shape is a sphere, we're not going to use a square and then sculpt it into a sphere. That doesn't make any sense. That's actually a tremendous amount of work. And guess what? It's always going to look a little bit more like a rectangle, even though you spend time smoothing out that sphere. So starting with the correct simple shape is actually going to give you a much stronger sculpture as you go through this process. Okay, so as a review, some landmarks, some anatomical landmarks. For me, I'm always looking for where the character has the most weight, and that's in the rear for the bear. We starting to figure out where his elbows and knees are, which is pretty good. Here's the elbow, here's the knee, elbow, and then there's the knee down there. And then once we have the elbows and the knees kind of figured out, we can start looking for other big primary forms. We can't forget about the hump, which defines how the spine is going to work on our character. Of course, that little hump is informed by some gigantic shoulder blades that come here. Underneath it are a whole series of muscles that connect into the shape, the overall structure of the elbow and the skeletal system underneath the bear. Once we have that kind of established, I can start looking at the head. So these are all important landmarks that gives us a tremendous amount of information in what this shape looks like. And as you just saw, I've done all of this research and all of this discovery without creating a simple polygon. This is a really great way to begin your model. You become a subject matter expert, not just on the context of the model itself, but the content of the model itself. What physically makes this model work and operate and provide that look, that feeling of a grizzly bear.